Hi, good evening. Welcome. Nice to see you all back here at DIA. Good evening. I'm Jasmine Raymond, DIA curator, and I'm very happy to have Josephine Meckseper tonight speaking on Hanne Darboven. This is the last of the lectures of this season, so you need to wait until next September when we start again. Just a reminder, we have one more poetry reading when is it? April 21st. Thank you. And also another reminder, everything is hitting one after the other, long day. Bob Whitman, we are having a performance at Dia Beacon at the riverfront. I don't know if you've heard of Passport. It's a theater performance by the artist Robert Whitman. We'll be taking it 2 different places at Montclair University, inside the theater there, and outdoors at Dia Beacon in the riverfront. That's on April 16 and 17. So if you want some experimentation and daring performance, please join us. It's going to be at 8 o'clock. And dress warmly and wear your rain boots, just in case. All right. I need to begin by thanking a few individuals because none of this is possible just by ourselves. The C Foundation and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs give us generous support for this lecture series. The 2010-2011 series is dedicated to the memory of Bradford Race, who was a DIA trustee from 2002 to 2010. I also would like to thank my colleagues Jean Dreskin, Patrick Hellman, Nikki Sebastian, and Sarah Kovac for their essential help in organizing this program. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome officially Josephine Meckseper to DIA. Drawing primarily on the legacy of the ready-made, Josephine Meckseper practice reached many corners of our society for her source material, for her reference, and the look of her work. Sometimes her sculptures resemble the department store vitrines or display cases, while her films take more of an exquisite corpse, documentary collage look, weaving present footage with archival material. But her interest in these seductive tactics of marketing and advertisement is always counterbalanced by an equally obsessive fascination with the contradictions that emerge in political discourse, propaganda, and the slogans that we live and die for. Since the early 1990s, Meckseper has dissected questions of ideological representation in her sculptures, photographs, and films to introduce a direct dialogue with the codes and standards of consumer culture, the pairing of exotic and the stylish, alongside the hygienic and the radical militant. Her complicated and sometimes ambiguous displays objectify the excesses in which we live in, but also critique them to focus our attention on the visual codification that shapes our political understandings of images. Meckseper's juxtapositions can be overwhelming. Sometimes they make us delirious, uncomfortable, but they all go into the intricacies and vagueness that they display. They disturb our sense of ethics. They prompt us to question, what is this farce all about? And who is this person reflected in the back mirror? She received her MFA degree in 1992 from the California Institute of Art. Her work has been included in solo exhibitions at the Museum of Modern Art, the Blaffer Gallery at the Art Museum of the University of Houston, the Migros Museum in Zurich, the Kunstmuseum in Stuttgart, among others, as well as group exhibitions such as the 2010 and 2006 Whitney Biennial, Contemplating the Void at the Guggenheim, Morality Beautiful from Every Point of View at the Wit to the Wit in Rotterdam, and Prospect One in New Orleans. Please help me welcome Josephine Meckseper.
Hi, thanks Jasmine for having me here tonight. The first time that I saw a major exhibition of Hanne Darboven's work was in 96 or 97 when her work Kulturgeschichte was installed at Dia Beacon. And I remember being really impressed by its radical, conceptual, and all-encompassing nature. It was also around the first time when I saw Gerhard Richter's complete atlas work at Documenta 10 in Kassel. And both works really struck me in a way how they dealt with imagery and trauma of German war crime and genocides in specific, and the 20th century as a whole. In this presentation, I'm showing documentations of the historical and political occurrences that are relating to Hanne Darboven's work in her life. They are images that relate to her having been raised near Hamburg during World War II and coming to New York during the Vietnam War era and experiencing the revolts of '68 in Germany, as well as the subsequent Cold War era. This presentation is really more like a subjective reflection on her work from a personal perspective. It leaves out explanations about minimalism and her musical and mathematical systems that she is so known for in her work. The second part of the presentation is a screening, or at least a section of her film Der Mond ist aufgegangen, which she made in 1982, and shows footage that she took in Hamburg and also in her own studio. And it's underlaid with classical music that she chose. Oh, sorry, one second. What I find particularly interesting in Hanne Darboven's work is how she compares the importance of the Enlightenment in Europe, and specifically Germany, to the regressive and catastrophic nature of fascism. The overarching theme of Enlightenment and encyclopedic accumulation is an important note in relationship to Hanne Darboven's work, because she frequently references key figures like Wolfgang von Goethe and Leibniz in her work. The encyclopedia that was published by Diderot and d'Alembert in France between 1751 and 1772 is a real sort of first manifestation of how the idea of enlightenment was put together in this kind of humanistic encyclopedia that based its entire system on the idea of memory, reason, and imagination. Bismarck, the minister of Prussia, also played an important role in Hanne Darboven's work, and he symbolizes, in a way, the era that ended the Enlightenment and led into World War I and World War II. Within her work, she is investigating a relationship between art and politics, and references Bismarck's unideological real politics versus Hitler's irrational, catastrophic politics of destruction. And this close-up of a piece in cultural history shows imagery from World War I. When I studied her work, I also noticed that she was probably very influenced by the writing of Adorno. which actually becomes very clear in this piece called Requiem for Oppenheimer from 1985, which, among other things, includes musical instruments, or it represents musical instruments from Max Oppenheimer, who was a Jewish musician in a concentration camp. And on the wall, there are text references to Adorno's proposition that to write poetry after Auschwitz is barbaric.
Germany celebrates German Arts Day in Munich, 1939. It is the Third Reich's last major art exhibit. Within 6 weeks, the Second World War would commence. Yes, this government, half of which consists of men who once aspired to serve the arts, is conscious of the artist's role as an intermediary, declares Hans Friedrich Munk, author and president of the Reich's Chamber of Literature. He continues, this government, born out of the opposition to rationalism, knows the people's inner longings, their boundless dreams, to which only the artist can give form.
The basis of Hanne Darboven's art shows how art loses its legitimacy as a communicative form in the light of the Nazi atrocities. And her work is engaged in accumulating the constituent parts of the collapse of the Enlightenment. In the clip that we just saw from the documentary Architecture of Doom, art is conveyed, or art is the conveyor of propaganda and provides cover for genocide and the annexation of neighboring countries. And it shows how the notion of art was instrumentalized during that time. And to me, it seems that Hanne Darboven is really suggesting that the historical events of Nazi Germany cannot be rationalized. And the need, and in a way there's a need that they be relived on a daily basis, which she does by writing, cataloging, and collecting evidence of irrationality. And aside from the installations and books, the core of her work might have been a sort of daily performance of lived experience that she executed in her own studio. And these found objects or artifacts from her own extensive collection show how objects no longer are innocent and that they carry meaning way beyond aesthetic form after having lived through World War II and the Nazi regime. And from what I found or what I read, she had entire warehouses filled with collections of writings and pictures and these type of found objects. And having grown up not far from Hamburg myself, although 25 years later than she did, and having moved to the US during my student years like Hanne Darboven, it's not that surprising in a way that my own work references similar and also the more recent political events and resources. These images show an anti-nuclear power demonstration near Hamburg that I participated in as a teenager in '81. The next clip that I'm showing is an excerpt from my film 0% Down, which relates to the sort of propaganda footage that I just showed of the architecture of doom film about Hitler. And I made it in 2008 with found car commercials that were playing on national TV, together with a soundtrack by Boyd Rice named Total War. In this presentation, I'm mainly focusing on Hanne Darboven's Kulturgeschichte, cultural history, which she completed between 1980 and 83. And it includes mainly visual materials, less writing and numbers as other projects, but mainly photographs and catalog pages and postcards and the found sculptures that I showed in the other images before. And there's always this kind of reference to German history in the work. And Hamburg, where she grew up, also played an important strategic role during World War II because of a massive firebombing on the city in 1943 when Hanne Darboven was 2 years old. The Battle of Hamburg, also codenamed Operation Gomorrah, was a campaign of air raids in 1943 for 8 days and 7 nights. It was at the time the heaviest assault in history of aerial warfare, and was later called the Hiroshima of Germany by British officials. Operation Gomorrah killed 42,600 people and left 37,000 wounded, and over 1 million Germans fled the city. And there was really no subsequent city raid that shook Germany more than this one on Hamburg. I mean, not even the one in Dresden came anywhere close to this one. And the next clip shows some documentary footage of this firebombing of Germany.
Gegen Nordwest.
In 1943, large parts of Hamburg were eradicated by a firestorm. 35,000 people died. Flew their air raids during the day. The British always went out at night. Once the target was located, it was marked by flares. Then the deadly load was dropped.
An einzelnen Häusern der Dachstuhl, aber die Gebäude selbst brannten noch nicht. Diese Lage hat sich jedoch dann in wenigen Minuten völlig verändert. Es setzte dann eine Luftbewegung ein, ein Feuersturm. Er kam aus Richtung Hauptbahnhof etwa und zog mit ungeheurer Gewalt in Richtung Borchfelde, Hammerbrook.
Yeah, this image shows Hanne Darboven's home where she lived from early on until her death in 2009. And it's in a small village near Hamburg called Rönneberg. This shows her in her studio. To me, the lists and numbers also have a sort of haunting association to the lists that the Nazis carried of their genocidal victims. And after this, I'm just showing a very short clip about some documentary footage of these kind of lists that they carried, and then a clip of Hitler's Alpine construction, this kind of megalomania building project that he carried on whilst
At a conference in Bonn,
committing war crimes of unimaginable dimensions.
At a conference in Wannsee on January 20th, 1942, the fate of European Jewry is sealed. Plans for the final solution to the Jewish question are drawn up. Hitler decided to rebuild his chalet in Berchtesgaden to have it befit his new status. To this end, he not only produced sketches, but completely took over the replanning of Berghof, his retreat. The original house was to be part of the new structure. The result was amateurish. Obvious weaknesses flaw the design. An Alpine chalet aspiring to be a chateau. Hitler's pride was a retractable window, the world's biggest, with an area of 32 square meters. At Berghof, the monumental is paired with the petty bourgeois in a bizarre way. The world's biggest retractable window is still a chalet window after all, a bourgeois dream absurdly inflated. The window on the landscape, like the glass over a painting, embodied Hitler's aesthetic ideal. Mountain landscapes were among his favorite motifs. At the Great German Art Exhibit in 1938, Hitler buys not only Zugspitz Massive by Franz Bernhardt, but 9 other paintings of Alpine scenes.
Yeah, I mean, the relationship between Hitler's delusional project and having committed these war crimes at the same time might have influenced Hanne Darboven to pick up on these kind of types of imagery, although these specific postcards that she used are from before World War II. But in a way, they really show us how the picturesque will really never be the same after what we just saw in this clip, which sort of brings a completely new reality to how we relate to art after World War II and the Nazi regime. Gerhard Richter equally picked up on this theme in his Atlas project, which he began in 1964. This is one of his pages from the Atlas projects. He produced over 780 panels with more than 4,000 images that included amateur family snapshots and reproductions from newspapers and popular magazines. Almost every photograph in Richter's Atlas project has been rephotographed, though, in order to create a standardized display that is actually somewhat comparable to Hanne Darboven's. And as is the case with Darboven, Richter's photographic imagery may be read as a historical trace of crimes and violent acts committed by the Nazis. And these are further images of his Atlas work. And he also shares with Hanne Darboven this approach that it's really impossible to make sense of a past that can really not be reconciled. And by accumulating all this information, it sort of points out to the fact that it can never really be processed, or the trauma can actually never be reconciled. The German news magazine Der Spiegel and its trademark red border brackets many of Hanne Darboven's work. And it can be read, or I think it can be read, as a reference to the Enlightenment because of the fact that Germany really represents a leftist political voice that could stand for the idea of the Enlightenment. But it can also be read as a form of replaceability that Hanne Darboven chose to illustrate the repetitive nature of the content that she was showing in her project, and that emphasizes the marking of every day as a way to prevent memories to simply be forgotten in ordinary daily routines. Der Spiegel is also home, its headquarters are in Hamburg, near where she had her studio. And it was actually the headquarter, was the city where all the publishing houses were housed after World War II. And it had a very kind of media heavy feeling. So the fact that she references media or these magazines like Der Spiegel or Stern might also have to do with the fact that this was all taking place right around the corner from where she lived. When I first moved to New York, I actually worked for Der Spiegel for several years as a freelance editor and journalist. And this was actually the last issue that I worked on after I stopped working there, which was the issue on September 11th. And I also published a conceptual magazine called Fad at the same time or throughout the 90s that uses really the magazine as a format or sort of as a way to put art into a different form than something that can be commercially shown in a gallery. And this piece in the magazine was a collaboration with Dan Graham. This is Hanne Darboven's work Evolution 86, which was for the first time installed at the Staatsgalerie in Munich in 1991. And it consisted of over 500 pages and photographs in over 200 frames. The concept of evolution was really that to show these kind of historical documents by showing not just images, but these kind of objects in form of human skeletons and a toilet seat and prostheses, legs from World War I, and gas masks and so on. These are some works of mine that also relate to the magazine work that I did before, and that also incorporate images of demonstrations that I was filming at the same time and photographing. In the 70s and 80s, Hanne Darboven's work also started showing references to the political unrest of the 60s and 70s, especially the leftist movements, and how the RAF was revolting against the continuation of Nazis in post-war, or the continuation of the power of individuals in post-war Germany. And Hamburg was also the home of another magazine called Concrete. It was a monthly, or is, because it still exists, a monthly German magazine for politics and culture, which was founded in 1957. Concrete was really a very radical left-wing magazine at the time, and Ulrike Meinhof served as the editor-in-chief from 1960 to 64. The title story of this particular issue was a story written by Ulrike Meinhof, who soon after joined the Baader-Meinhof Red Army faction. The next two clips show documentary footage of Ulrike Meinhof and the Baader-Meinhof faction in Germany.
Auch für Ulrike Meinhof, die 3 Jahre später mit Andreas Baader in den Untergrund gehen wird. Die linke Journalistin der Zeitschrift Konkret, zu dieser Zeit noch bekennende Pazifistin, wird mit ihren Artikeln und öffentlichen Auftritten zu einer Sprecherin der Protestbewegung.
Wir alle wissen, dass Kurras den ohne Sorg totgeschossen hat. Und dass Kurras freigesprochen worden ist. Also ein Idiot. Ja? Ein Mann, der nicht weiß, was er tut. Die Polizei beschäftigt Idioten.
Demonstrated once too often in an orderly, appropriate and unsuccessful fashion. We have had enough of providing the veneer of democracy.
Die Straße spielte auch in die Wohnung hinein. Also es war quasi so eine Auflösung von...
I think we wanted to be part of a more international youth movement, which was, I think, then happening. With music, demonstrations, new ideas, anti-war movement. We would try to join up with other people, and I think we despised what our parents had created. We were angry that we had to live with a past like that. Our generation was in love with the revolution.
Und dass man versuchte, das mit sich fertig zu bringen.
War sehr von sich überzeugt, alles immer auf die Spitze zu treiben und dann...
In Western society, the system has managed to drag the masses so deeply into their own crap that they seem to have lost any feeling for their position as exploited and oppressed, so that they dream of nothing more than a car, a holiday, and a tiled bathroom.
The footage that you just saw reminds me really of this particular detail of cultural history, where she used these, I think they were Polish sort of training tracksuits on these mannequins. And the whole idea of sort of capitalism and its relationship to the politics that are discussed in the panels behind those mannequins, I think has a real relationship to the issues that the Baader-Meinhof group was so heavily fighting against. And some of these same issues also play a role in my work, like this piece and this work from 2009. These are a few details that show images that she collected while she was in New York between 1966 and 68. The photographs that she incorporated of these doorways in Manhattan were actually not her own. She collaborated, or she asked the photographer Roy Colmer to incorporate his photography in her work. He actually had started this very extensive process of photographing almost every doorway in New York. And they're actually still available to be viewed online at the New York Public Library. There's a whole like pages and pages of these doorways that you can look at. So during Hanne Darboven's years in New York, I imagine that she was also exposed to the sort of responses to the Vietnam War at the time, and there are works or details in her work that directly relate to Vietnam and the protests against it.
I really didn't know what was going on all around me during the 60s, but that something was going on, it was crystal clear. There was the establishment, also known as them, and the police, among who I counted myself. But I knew exactly what we were against. We were against that.
Serious injuries, however, in New York's biggest anti-war march. A companion piece demonstrates... I really didn't know what was going on all around me during the 60s.
Yeah, when I first moved to this country in 1990, I studied at Cal Arts, and one of the first pieces that I did was this kind of situationist collaboration with other artists that ended up happening at the same day when the Rodney King riots erupted, and we were filming this kind of performance thing that we were doing, and then it soon started to incorporate these shots that we got of the city being on fire, or where you basically see the smoke rising like around us. And this next clip is an excerpt from that film from 1991.
People like us
yeah, we can go, what a rush.
Yeah, because I mean the flames even come in psychedelic colors this far away.
I don't know if you're instigating it. I think that red thing over there is like an airship landing. Where? Oh, that red line. Stripes of red. Everyone. One stripe of red. Yeah. Fuck's that helicopter? Do you hear that helicopter? Oh, it's everywhere.
Yeah, and this is an installation that I subsequently made at Gerhard's, which involved these kind of chemical formulas for explosives, and was really set up like the headquarters of like some kind of terrorist organization. Yeah, to sum up this part of the lecture, I mean, it really emphasized the sort of relationship to the historical underpinnings of the works of Hanne Darboven, which come sometimes off as somewhat dry or repetitive, but underneath sort of the dryness are these extremely traumatic, sort of, you know, unreconcilable events that play a really important role in her work. The last bit of the lecture, I would like to show part of her film called Der Mond ist aufgegangen, The Moon is Risen, from 1983, which is a very kind of handheld footage that she took herself, obviously sort of walking around the city, stopping in front of billboards, and then scanning through her studio, and you see certain objects that were in the installations as being part of her kind of studio inventory. The film is an hour long, so I thought I'd stop at some point. Yeah, I guess, are there any questions? Or? No questions? Sure. Yeah, the Mond is risen. Risen? Yeah. I assume that there's also the moon, yeah, that there's a musical component to it that is equally important, because I think there's a record aside from the film that was an addition as well. All right, well, thanks for coming.